So, like I said, I'll post this after class. I'll break this video up into 2 videos. So like if you want to come back to this later, I'll break up the discussion of the paper from the discussion we're getting ready to do on Frankenstein. So I'll break it up into 2 little videos. So if you want to go back to this later, it'll be up on our page for you. So, well, Frankenstein then, let's get to it. So technically I'm using this fancy, my Zoom blur, my background's blurring it out, but I'm using this fancy edition of it here. I always feel fancy when I use it. But Frankenstein's the earliest work of literature that we're reading in this class. So Mary Shelley wrote this thing before Poe or any of these other writers were writing. She was about a decade and a half before Poe started writing. So she is really our first. She's not the first ever Gothic writer. There's a few famous ones from the late 1800s in England who were writing. But she's the first author, I should say, that wrote a really good one. A lot of those other Gothic novels that started in the late 1700s, going into the early 1800s. A lot of those other ones, frankly, aren't that good. Some people might take exception to that, people who study some of those. But frankly, I think a lot of the other Gothic novels before Frankenstein are boring. That's just my opinion, though. But you had other Gothic writers before her, like Walter Scott, Horace Walpole. So, but Mary Shelley is really the first really good one. So I think this was published in 1817, if I'm not mistaken. Let me actually, it says here in the text. This actually matters because there's 2 versions of it published. Yeah, there's 2 versions of it published during Shelley's lifetime. The earliest one was in 1817, and then there was a revision of the book done in 1831, where she added a couple of more things. I'm pretty sure that you guys are all reading the original 1817 version. So it's actually split into, it matters which one you use. I guess that's my point here. She went back to it later in life. She wrote this book when she was 17 years old, right? So all of you guys in here are most of you guys in here are 17, 18, 19, right? Right. Mary Shelley's already beat you to it as far as a major life accomplishment, right? She wrote this thing when she was just 17 years old, which is insane.
Mr. Yeager, in the sort of, well, I got this from one of the English teachers at my school. It says unbranded, so I think it's the original. And it does give one of those sort of things where it just sort of explains a bit about the author. The Lord of the Rings has it too, where it's just like something random. But it says that during the summer of 1816, Mary and her husband went to somewhere, I think Scotland. So does that mean that she was married by the age 17?
She was, yeah. And she was married to a famous poet, Percy Shelley. And so she married him very early. I don't actually know a lot about why they got married early or any of that. Yeah, you're exactly right, Haley. She was already married when she wrote it.
Well, it was 1816. Maybe it was like normal back then.
Yeah, a little bit more normal back then than it is now. Like if you go back into like the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance and stuff, when girls would marry really early, like 13 or 14. But I think by this period, it started to be a little later. Go ahead.
In the version that I've got, it gives like a little excerpt on her. She was 15 when her and Percy met. Percy was 21 and Mary not yet 17 when they got married. And she gave birth in 1815 to a girl who died only after a couple of weeks.
Yeah, the bit about her losing her child really early, there's actually a lot of interpretation about the novel because of that. Like the sort of feelings she was having over losing her child, right? Some of that is oftentimes said to come into the book. So yeah, good. I'm glad you provided us that information, Jordan. 21, marrying a 17-year-old, right? It could be worse, right? It could be worse. 4 years isn't too bad of an age difference. So
I got married at 17 to a 21-year-old.
There you go, Jordan. There you go. Not too bad. Yeah, I'm 6 years older than my wife, so we oftentimes like to play that. Of course, I didn't meet her till I was 30 something, but we oftentimes like to play that game. Like, how old were you when I was doing whatever, right? So like, how old were you when I started grad school? Like, oh, I was in like the 8th grade. So we have fun with that type of thing sometimes. Like, she likes to make me feel creepy. So yeah, 4 years isn't too bad, right? But yeah.
Well, he's almost 5 years older than me.
It's a fun game to play. But her husband Percy died at a very young age. He's one of those classic cliches, right, of a great writer dying at a young age. But yeah, he died very early and left her a widow in her 20s. So that's a sad little bit. It depends on what type of class you're in, but oftentimes if you take like a British Lit 2 class, Percy Shelley will often be read in there because he's one of the great romantic poets. I'll talk a little bit about them as we go. But yeah, the story is, I don't know if you got this in your intro, Jordan or Haley, but the story is the Shelleys got together with their other friends who were also writers. Lord Byron was one of them. I think Samuel Coleridge was one of them. All these writers are still read today, but all of them got together for a weekend at like this lake house or something, right? And the atmosphere outside was spooky, right? It was like thunderstorm, rainy. So they all got together. So they all had this contest, like which one of us can write the best scary story, right? So Mary kind of ran with it, right? And she wrote this story in the span of a month and came back. And needless to say, she won the contest, right? But she even wrote it as this contest that started between friends.
Yeah, it has all of it in there.
Yeah, it's an amazing feat that she wrote it that early in her life, but also the fact she wrote it that quick too. That's also an amazing feat.
Yeah, I could never do that.
Yeah. You could, Kylie, if you put your mind to it. You could.
It's a bit long. I don't know if I could write it that long. Maybe a shorter one.
As you know, they didn't have other things to keep them occupied back in the day, like they didn't have the Netflix and whatnot, right? So yeah, I guess you can put your free time to good use without such things. So yeah, that's your intro to the author here. The beginning of the story, I should mention, I don't know if the beginning of the story threw you guys off when when we got the whole bit with the Arctic captain of the boat and all that. But the beginning of the story is written in what's called an epistolary style. And basically what that means in the 1700s, the 1700s is when novels started being written, right? A little bit of literary history. Before the 1700s, you didn't have novels. Really, all you had was drama and poetry. You didn't have novels, fictional novels, until the 1700s. That's when that form was invented. But some of the earliest novels are called epistolary, and the way that they were written, it was written as like letters and journal diaries and things like that. So the author would sometimes tell the story by linking together a bunch of like letters between characters or journals or something like that. And that's how the author would tell the story. You would kind of have to piece it together from like all these different letters the characters would write back and forth to each other and stuff. You know, that's called an epistolary novel. And we're not reading Dracula in this class. I normally teach Dracula in this class, but if you ever read Dracula, Dracula is written in that way, in the sort of letter style. But it starts out like that. You have the captain writing home to his sister, right? So they're up in the Arctic, and he's writing this letter to his sister, and that's how he's conveying whatever's happening. So oftentimes the beginning of a story throws students off, right? Because like I think I'm getting ready to read about Frankenstein, right? What are we doing up here in the Arctic with this boat captain? But you guys found out, right? Victor is in the Arctic for some reason, and we'll next week when we congregate again next week, we will get a resolution with all that. And yeah, the whole thing starts off in an interesting way because it starts out with these letters up in the Arctic. This was when the British were trying to explore the Arctic. There was lots of, and the Antarctic, like that's a whole interesting history in itself. These explorers would go off and try to reach the North Pole or whatever. And oftentimes they would get stuck there. Like if they sailed and then the ocean would freeze, right? And oftentimes they got stuck there until the ocean would thaw out enough to let them come back, if it ever did thaw out enough. So they would pack these ships with like 4 or 5 years worth of food, canned food, right? And until just in case they got stuck. So here our writer's stuck, right? He's kind of stuck up there. There's a really good TV show called The Terror. You guys want to watch a really good TV show? There's a really good TV show called The Terror. It's about that. So yeah, it starts out in that sort of strange way. Then we kind of get to their story. What did you guys make of that letter thing? Did that throw you guys off, as I just said? I see you shaking your head there, Jessica. Were you thinking, what the heck? Yeah, go ahead.
So it kind of starts out like in the present, and then he comes up on, what he's going to write about, right?
Right.
Kind of switch. Okay. Because I was kind of confused about that too when I was reading it.
Yeah, they start out in the present, and then Victor goes back and tells them the story from beginning to end. By the time we get to the end of the book, they'll come back to the present, and things will happen at the end of the book. Okay, so yeah, we will go back to the Arctic before the end of the book. You'll kind of see how we get there, right? As the book goes on. Yeah, that it starts out in that weird style, but then it sort of becomes more of a traditional narrative after that when Victor tells the story as filtered through the captain. Yeah, I mean, here we have our story of Frankenstein, right? This is a classic, iconic story. Of course, one thing that we need to differentiate is there's a difference between the Frankenstein monster and Frankenstein himself, right? Frankenstein is oftentimes called Frankenstein, and the monster is oftentimes called the monster or the creature. Oftentimes, it's just one of these types of things where everybody always calls the monster Frankenstein, right? That's part of pop culture. It's such a part of our pop culture, right? But it's correct, I should say, to say that Frankenstein's the scientist, the monster's called the monster. Okay, so that will be our vocabulary as we discuss the book. Yeah, they make a distinction. Yeah, I mean, one thing we read part one for today, so we get the whole story of the creation and all that. I just kind of want to ask you guys, just in general, how familiar were you with the Frankenstein story before reading the book? And have you guys watched a bunch of the films around Halloween time? Do you like your cereal that he's on, right? The Count Chocula and all that, right? Like what experiences have you had with this character before?
Other than like watching the shows and stuff, we also went over this book in my high school English class.
So you guys all from Lincoln County have all done this book already?
Yeah.
So good. So you all should all have good things to say, right?
I only read a little bit about it in 8th grade, and then a person that like goes over these kinds of books and stuff, I watched a YouTube about it. I watched a YouTube video about it. So the Antarctic thing didn't really throw me off because I knew that it was gonna like loop back, but I haven't actually like read the whole thing.
I think it's weird how like the stuff you see in real life about him, people dressing up about like him and stuff, it's really not like the book. Like when you read it, I feel like it's just a lot different.
Yeah, you're not wrong, Gabe. The original movie from the 1930s retells the story, and that's almost what's become part of our culture, even more than the book. You know, that the way that they tell the story in that movie is extremely different than it is here in the book. And pretty much all the retelling since have kind of went with the original movie telling instead of the actual novel. We don't really have a lot of good depictions of the novel because they all kind of go from like the 30s movie. That's where a lot of it all started.
I was actually very shocked because once I've never read the book or anything, I've watched the original Frankenstein. So when I started reading the book, I was so thrown off because I was really thinking it was going to be like the movie.
So you've seen the original one from the 30s. Yeah. Yeah, actually, I actually uploaded a video to our Brightspace page, but it's a video of me and another guy. We're talking about the differences between the book and the movie. So if you guys are curious, pull that video up. We kind of break it down like how it's very different. But as you said, Jessica, if you've seen the movie, it's extremely different.
I will say I have tried the cereal. I do like Count Chocula better. I hate to say it, but that Count Chocula is a bit better than the Frankenstein cereal.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one, Audrey. Yeah, Count Chocula beats, what's it, Frankenberries? Is that what they call it?
Don't even remember it. It ain't good enough to be remembered.
I'm a fan of the Boo Berry.
Yeah, I think that's what the Frankenstein cereal is. Is it blueberry?
No, Frankenberry and Blueberry are better, and I agree with Jessica. Blueberry is better than the Frankenberry and the Count Chocula.
I agree with that statement too. It's better.
I've never had any of those cereals. Never even heard of them.
Yeah, I didn't know there were cereals either.
Yeah, they only come out around October time. So this October, look out for them in the grocery store. Yeah, I usually try to stock up on my Count Chocula for a month or two, like during October.
I'll look out for them. I don't remember reading the book at any time during high school. I'm sure I did, but I probably didn't. Like, we probably went over it. I just didn't read it. And also, I've never watched any of the movies.
You kind of went in blind then, which
Yeah,
is good.
I knew nothing other than like the stereotypical like Frankenstein monster that you would see like at Halloween or costumes or whatever. Like, that's all I knew.
Yeah, that's how I was. I hadn't read the books or watched the movie, and I thought that the monster was called Frankenstein. I didn't know it was the guy who created the monster.
Yeah, sometimes English teachers get huffy if you call the monster Frankenstein. I don't really care, right? Yeah, there is a distinction there. Mackenzie, I know you're a big horror fan. We talked about horror before. Have you encountered Frankenstein before this?
I had never read Frankenstein, just like have heard of it, and I've seen it in a lot of like movies and stuff. I was in a theater class, and we watched an original like Frankenstein's like monster, and that's where I learned that Frankenstein was the scientist's name, not the monsters, the creation.
So did you watch the movie from the 30s, the one that Jessica was mentioning? The old black and white one.
Yeah, like yeah, it was very old. I was like, just oh my gosh.
Was it Miss Burns' class?
Yeah, it was Miss Burns.
How did I know? How did I know?
She had a whole like series of old movies, just like writing stuff down about them.
She could have picked the worst one to do than that. So give her credit.
Yeah, we also did like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and stuff like that. Just classic ones.
All the
Well,
stuff.
I had her 10th grade, and she was showing us like claymation of Godzilla fighting a robot. It was so weird.
Yeah, I've had her for 3 semesters now, so we've been a lot.
Sounds like a class I need to take, right? So sign me up for that. But yeah, we'll read Dr. Jekyll in here in a week or two. That'll actually be my first stab teaching that story, so that should be fun. But I'll show you guys what the 30s monster looks like. Let me kind of show you what it looks like. This is the pop culture Frankenstein monster, what it looks like. The descriptions in the novel are way different than the way that he was designed in the movie for the 30s. Just kind of Googling it here real quick. Yeah, here's what he looks like from the original 1930s movie, right? This is the classic representation, right? He's got the staples in his head. He's got the weird, he's got the weird looking head. It's the, if you guys have ever watched the Munsters, right? It looks just like he does in the Munsters too. Yeah, if you look at this thing, like, it's not, he's not the most pleasant guy to look at, right? But he's not so ghastly that you would almost stop in your tracks if you saw him. Maybe we would, right? But the way that Victor describes him in the novel, right? It's not quite like the depiction we get in the 30s here isn't quite so horrifying, I would argue. This is definitely he's got the bolts in his neck, right? This is the classic representation of the creature that we see everywhere.
In that class, they showed like a whole series, like documentary of like the artist doing the makeup and everything. I think it's the more like you can say like human-like version of Frankenstein, as where others are more like scary and crazy looking.
Yeah, if you watch that original 30s movie, there's a lot of room for sympathy for the monster in it, right? Because he's very much like an infant the whole time. He kind of grows up in the book, but in that novel or in the movie, he's this like really simple, like he's got an infant's brain. Yeah, Boris Karloff is an icon of early horror. That whole decade of the 1930s, they made all these great Universal monster movies. So you had the original Frankenstein, you had the original Dracula with Bela Lugosi. Like, his Dracula is still the Dracula we see on the cereal box and stuff now too. So they've made a lot better movies of all these books since then, right? But those are the originals, right? So they're iconic. If you guys all spotted this thing on the street, right? Would you stop in your tracks and run the other way, right? Probably, right? You probably stop and stare at least, right? But he's not so bad that we would be disgusted like it is here in the book. I wouldn't want to run into him on a dark street in the middle of the night or anything. That would be bad. I see you shaking your head there, Jordan. No, heck no, I don't want to run into him.
There's some guys in our school that look like, yeah, it's fine.
They're the tackles on the football team, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, now that we're kind of introduced ourselves to the whole thing here, now we can kind of break down the novel some. There's a lot of interesting themes in part one here, but just to kind of kick us into it, at the beginning of the novel, we find out like all about Frankenstein, right? We learn that he's so curious about science. We talked before a couple of weeks ago about medicine in the 1800s and how a lot of people saw the doctors as not caring about the patients. They cared more about the advancement of science instead, right? So you had this whole character type of the overambitious doctors who don't really care about the result of whatever they're doing, as long as they can advance the science. So we definitely kind of get this mad scientist archetype here. But yeah, we learn that early that he's reading all these books from these different medieval writers, like about like how do you create life and all this stuff. So he actually learns the secret. Here's how you create life. He actually learns it and creates this monster. But the reader never lets us in on the secret, right? I don't know if you guys noticed that, but he never really lets you in on the secret about how he figured it out. It would be too, if we did this again, right? It would be too ghastly, right? This action has consequences. But that's pretty much what this whole book in a nutshell is about, right? This guy's actions have dire consequences. We create this creature, right? Who suddenly, you create this creature and he's pretty much like an infant, right? Victor kind of leaves him by the side of the road almost, right? So here we get a creature who has no nurturing, nothing like that at all. And well, he becomes a murderous monster. But this book raises a lot of questions, like, is it something's inner nature that makes it bad? So whenever we're talking about good and evil, like whenever we're talking about like good and evil actions,
I just want a couple.
Is it something's inner nature that makes it bad, or is it the way that it was raised and nurtured, right? So, or lack thereof. So like, even if you want to go back and talk about somebody like Ted Bundy or some of the big famous serial killers throughout history, that's always a question. Like,
whatever dog it was, thank them for removing the paw in the middle of my back.
Jordan, I think we
Like the question that you're asking is because he was abandoned, is that why he was murderous?
Yeah, so I guess the question I'm kind of leaning towards here, was it because of is it this monster's inner nature that makes it bad? Because we learn that it comes from all these different dead body parts and all this, right? So this relates to all kinds of questions like this. So this is a psychology question, right? Is it this thing's inner nature that makes it bad? Like, is it, we can even kind of relate this to genetics, right? Whenever it comes to genetics, are some people genetically predisposed to be bad? Or is it the
nature over nurture?
Nature versus nurture, right? Where do you guys stand on this question, nature versus nurture? We know that monsters abandoned, so we learn a lot more about that in the next part of the book. But what's your guys' sort of stomach feeling? Like, do you think that the monsters are created by their inner nature or the nurture, or a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both, just because the monster was created and automatically the scientist was just like, oh my gosh, this thing is hideous, and runs from it. And the creation having like the mind of a toddler, it automatically just like, okay, it may not think that this is the person that created me, but it's the first person that it sees. So maybe it's trying to seek out his creator by any means necessary, even though he doesn't know why. So that could be like the nature part of it, by any means.
See, it sounds like you're tilting a little towards nurture there, Mackenzie, because he was rejected even at that earliest moment in his life.
I agree. I'd have to be more towards nurture, simply like because of what Kinsey said. Like, he was created, he doesn't really know what he's doing, doesn't know any better.
I'd say it's just kind of instinct, because you look at animals and stuff, when they're born, they just have that natural instinct just to kind of kill.
So Gabe, you think here that the monster might have, even in the past life or something, have been a killer?
Well, he's composed of all these dead body parts. It makes you wonder kind of if that has an effect on it too. I mean, yeah, it could be what you're saying.
I could see what Gabe's saying because like the whole epitome of the like monster itself is just death. So, and maybe that just goes into its like living form too.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of more on the nurture side because I mean, people are a product, or for the most part, kind of like a product of your environment, So what influences a person's behavior is kind of how they were brought up or, their surroundings. And I think, the monster obviously had a lot of like negative like things going on.
Yeah, your comment there. I'll definitely come back to you next week because we in part 2 of the book we learn all about like what makes the monster, what kind of experiences he had that made him this way. So yeah, it'll be interesting to come back to this next week for sure. Gabe, I know with your comments, the movie version plays around with that idea. Yeah, Jessica, I see Jessica shaking her head. She knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, but yeah, in the movie version, when Victor goes to get the brain from the monster, there's 2 brains in a jar, and one of them is like famous, world-renowned scientist, right? And the other brain, the label on the bottle is abnormal, right? So they accidentally knock over the jar that's got the scientist brain in it, right? So that they're stuck using the abnormal brain, right? So the monster is kind of disabled from the beginning, right? Because it has this abnormal brain. That's a thing the movie came up with, right? We don't learn about that in the book, like whose brain it is or whatever. But that's something the movie played around with. What would the rest of you guys say? Some of you guys haven't said much yet. What would the rest of you guys say to this nature versus nurture question? Are monsters born or are monsters created?
I think in a way it's kind of both, but I think that nurture, in my opinion, I think nurture always plays a greater factor, or excuse me, not nature, but nurture, because even though like genetics, you're predisposition to certain things, but that doesn't always make it like, say, a rapist. It doesn't, just because there's people in your family that's rapists, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a rapist. I think that certain things are more supported and like kind of like bred in you, by your environment.
Right. Yeah. If I was going to give a counter argument to you there, Jessica, what I would pose as a counter argument is there's some factors that do seem kind of genetic, like let's say an alcoholism, right? You can make the argument that there's a gene that if alcoholism or something like that runs in the family, but you're way predisposed to become an alcoholic yourself. So maybe the nurturing would overcome that, right? Maybe. But like even for something, violence is something that we have to ask that question, like, is violence something that can be passed down in that way? So how does that complicate things any by saying some stuff like alcoholism can be caused by genes and not just but nurturing?
I'd say I'd still have to go with the nurture sort of side, because even though one may have, I guess, genetically some sort of problem with them, I think with the right sort of nurture, that can lead the person to have a better life as their genetics may pose.
Right, it's a classic case of good parenting overcomes overcomes the instinct.
Well, most children of alcoholics, when they see what their parents are doing to themselves, will actually turn against alcoholism.
I was just about to bring that up. I feel like with the alcoholism thing, it's like that may be kind of almost their nature, I guess, but like if they're, I mean, you can be taught not like this and still end up doing it, but like it's whether or not they choose to drink the alcohol in the first place.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Actually, I honestly think I wrote about it in one of our past papers that we did in English 101.
I remember him.
Some things kids do is because of their parents, and some things the kids do are in spite of their parents. And I think that's why I'm mostly stuck on whether it's nature or nurture, because they're both so random and specific to the person. It's different for everybody.
Yeah, you sometimes get certain people like let's take Ted Bundy, for instance, right? This guy seemed to have a perfect life, right, before we found out what he did. So like, is that a case where he's just naturally a monster, right, and not just a created monster through lack of nurture? So you look back at his childhood, if you watch a lot of those documentaries and stuff, right, he seemed to have a really normal life. But he's a case where you can kind of make the nature side. So go on what you said there, Jesse, maybe it depends on the person. Maybe one wins out over the other for different people.
Well, in my personal opinion, I think everybody has a predisposition of good or evil. It's the choices that you're taught and the choices that you make on whether or not you're either good or evil.
I feel like also, like, considering it's like Ted Bundy and his nature, him getting away with it for so long also played a factor in him like continuing on the path of like killing people and everything. He just doing bad because he could get away with it, so he continued to do it.
Right, very much became a power trip sort of thing. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why we're drawn to people like him, right? Like if you notice, there's like a bajillion documentaries about him on like Netflix and stuff, right? Because it's a very popular genre, the criminal minds sort of genre, right? Everybody always has this question: is it nature or nurture?
People today tend to romanticize serial killers, though. It's crazy.
Yeah, even when Ted Bundy was alive, right? You had like women showing up to his prison, like women who were like in love with him and stuff like that, right? Even the one he had a kid with when he was in jail. You got, and you guys probably know all about that if you've seen a lot of those documentaries.
Yeah, like they even casted Zac Efron like as a good-looking character to play him in the I can't think it. The one on Netflix. I don't know the name of it.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I'm gonna have to sit down and watch it sometime.
Yeah, it's like something extremely wicked and shocking or vile or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely return to this conversation next week when we read the whole novel, right? Because it'll definitely be interesting to see what you guys have to say next week after the monster tells a story. Will be one of the major questions I'll ask you guys next week too is how much pity or lack thereof do you feel for this monster? Because we'll learn that he went through horrendous. He had a horrendous life after his creation, but does that excuse his behaviors? Right. So this will be whether we sympathize with the creature or not. This will definitely be an interesting aspect for next week. Right now, where we are in the novel right now, he doesn't. Right. We can kind of see like maybe he wants revenge on Victor. Right. He kills Victor's little brother and frames like he frames like the maid for the murder, Justine. Right, but we can have, maybe right now we're kind of like, okay, yeah, he wanted revenge. But yeah, next week when we get the whole picture, I'll definitely be interested to see what you guys have to say. One passage I kind of want to anchor us in the text a little bit. One passage that I want to bring up is the dream that Victor has after he creates the monster. This is one of the most interesting passages I think in the whole book. Let me quickly find it for you. I'm sure we all have different editions, so I'll give you a location. Let me see where is it. Okay, it's in chapter 4. Chapter 4 is where this passage is. This is what happens when Victor first creates the creature. And somebody mentioned earlier in class about, I think it was Jordan mentioned earlier in class about Mary Shelley losing a child. Like she lost her baby, right around the time she was writing this. This passage is oftentimes seen as this like very personal passage because of that. So let's kind of make sense. This is the passage right at the beginning of chapter 4. The paragraph starts with different accidents of life. Okay, so I don't know what version you're using or what have you, but it's like 2 paragraphs in. It starts with the different accidents of life. Says the different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feeling of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this, I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished. Breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I had rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. Length lassitude succeeded in the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I had held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I started with sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead. My teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed when, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. So the dream, right? What's going on with the dream that he's having, right? So here's we can definitely bring some psychology into this, right? But right after he creates this monster, he dreams that he goes to kiss his love Elizabeth. Of course, we could talk about the whole Elizabeth Victor relationship, right? We could definitely kind of talk about that, because their whole relationship's kind of strange anyway, right? You know, she's his like cousin, but she gets adopted into the family early, we find out. So it's almost accepted that she's going to marry Victor, even when she's like a little kid. Like it's almost like a prearranged marriage type of thing, right?
Is that what was going on? I was under the impression that the parents adopted her, so he would now be her sister. But then he kept calling her his cousin, and I was really confused.
Yep. The way that I just explained it, right? She's adopted. She's like a distant cousin or something, but she's adopted with the intention that she'll eventually marry Victor. So,
Do I possibly have a different version?
why do you say that, Jessica?
Because in mine, her mother or his mother just randomly came home with her and did adopt her, but it was mine never once said that it was that they were cousins.
Where in the book are you at there, Jessica? You might be right. I might be.
Hold on just a moment. Let me find it.
In mine, it did say that the mom went ahead without the dad because they had gone and visited like poverty families, and that was one of them, and she saw this kid that was like prettier than the others, and she was like, I want that one. So that could be what you are talking about, where it's like the dad wasn't there, and I think she either came home with her or the dad just like went over there, was like, oh yeah, we can have this one.
I'm looking through my version here. I wonder if this might be a difference between even the two versions of the story that I told you guys about earlier. Like there's two different editions with different details. Okay, let me see.
In yours, does it say that the parents intended for Victor and Elizabeth to fall in love? Because in mine, it did really make it seem like they were supposed to be siblings, but he was like, I interpreted this as she will be the love of my life.
Let me, I'm just quickly looking here before I answer that, Haley. It looks like the passage where she's first introduced in chapter 1. It says, from this time Elizabeth Lavenza became my playfellow. Oh yeah, okay, I see. It says my father, this is really early in chapter 1. It says my father did not hesitate and immediately went to Italy that he might accompany the little Elizabeth to her future home. I've often heard my mother say that she was at that time the most beautiful child she had ever seen and showed signs even that of a gentle and affectionate disposition. These indications and a desire to bind as closely as possible the ties of domestic love determined my mother to consider Elizabeth as my future wife, a design which she never found reason to repent. And then it kind of goes off into a description of what she looks like and all that. So Jessica, is that the version you read there? No.
No, mine says that his mother had much desire to have a daughter, but I continued to be their single offspring. When I was about 5 years old, while making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, they passed a week on the shores of the Lake of Como. Then it goes on to say that during one of their walks to a poor caught in the foldings, a vow attracted them to notice a singular child, half-clothed children. And then it says, my mother, accompanied by me, visited this abode. She found a peasant and his wife hard working, bent down by the care and labor. And then it said that they had 5 babes. And then it goes to say, among these was one which attracted my mother far above all the rest. She appeared of a different stock. The 4 others were dark-eyed, hardly little vagrants. This child was thin and very fair. And then it talks about her hair, and despite her poverty and her clothing, she set a crown of distinction on her head. Her brow was clear and ample, her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips and the molding of her face so expressive of sensibility and sweetness that none could behold her without looking on her as if a distinct species, a being heaven sent, and bearing a celestial stamp in all of her features.
That's the same version I have too, Jessica.
Yeah, I have no idea what's going on here, right? I wonder if it's just the different editions that I was mentioning, because I think I'm using the 1817 original. I wonder if you guys have the 1831 reprint.
Mine says in the front page of it, it says it is a republication of the text of the 3rd edition of the 1831.
There you go then. There you go. We got 2 different versions of the text. Like the original version, she's meant to be his future wife, right? But it sounds like she changed that in the later version.
No, it still says that she, the whole reason one of the reasons why they adopted her is that she could be his future wife. It actually leaves that in there.
It says, and when on the morrow she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I with childish seriousness interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love, and cherish.
Yeah, this version, when it describes her after the passage that I read, it describes their relationship as children. It says, from this time, Elizabeth Lavenza became my playfellow. As we grew older, my friend. She was docile and good-tempered, yet gay and playful as a summer insect. Although she was lively and animated, the feelings were strong and deep, and her disposition uncommonly affectionate. No one could better enjoy liberty, yet no one could submit with more grace than she did to constraint and caprice. Her imagination was luxuriant, yet her capability of application was great. The person saw was the image of her mind. Her hazel eyes, although as lively as a bird's, possessed an attractive softness. Figure was light and airy, and although capable of enduring great fatigue, she appeared the most fragile creature in the world. While I admired her understanding and fancy, I loved to tend on her as I should on a favorite animal. I never saw so much grace, both of person and mind, united to so little pretension. Does that paragraph in yours? No.
It's not in this version, but I have the original version on my phone, and it's in this.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Dr. Yeager.
Yes.
Haley, her iPad died, and so she won't be able to join probably for the rest of the time. She plugged it in, but it might not charge by the time we're done.
Okay, yeah, I'll mark hers here. Yeah, I know she's
Okay.
here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, let's see. Yeah, I'm definitely using the 1818 version. Yeah, so there you go. Difference between two versions right there. Um, so we created some confusion, right? Just because I have a different version than you guys. I don't think I've ever read the 1830 version of it, her changes. Main reason why is because scholars, I think, have mostly accepted the 1817 one as the better version. Haley, I see you're back with us. We've discovered that we all have different versions of the text. A lot of you guys are reading the 1830s, and I have the 1817, so that's caused a bunch of confusion.
Okay, so yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, my iPad decided to
Yeah.
die at the perfect moment.
This kind of thing would make a good research paper for you guys later, right? If you're interested in this type of thing, like what are the differences? How does each version change maybe the themes of the text, right? This would actually be kind of a good project to stumble on if you're interested in this sort of, in the differences and why she changed things and all that. So stuff like that makes for good papers at the end of the class. So there you go. All right.
I just realized on the back of my book, it does say this is the 1830 version.
Does it?
Yeah. Or 1831.
Well, this teaches me a lesson too, because I'm going to have to be more careful in the future when I teach this thing again, right? Say, hey, use this particular one. I'm going to have to be more careful.
Did you explain?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Did you explain why if it was weird that they're married? Like, if it was determined that they're meant to be siblings, and why he calls her his cousin?
Yeah, well, we didn't get back to that yet, right? But right, it is a little strange, right, that she's adopted at that young of an age and expected to become his wife. It said something about how it would unite the family together. So there was some type of like family dynamic, like it would help the extended family come together again or something like that. Yeah, it's odd, right? The biggest thing to note here is she's absent as a character in the book for the most part, right? Like you don't really see her any, right? She's completely absent the whole time. If we're going to get back to her dream, right? He imagines her in the dream. I know the dreams in both versions, right? But he imagines her in the dream and he goes to kiss her and she becomes his mother again. It's interesting when we get this dream right after Victor unnaturally creates a monster. Because the question here is, what does Victor take away during the creation process? He takes away the mother, right? There's no mother involved here, right? So it's interesting that he dreams of his own mother after the act of creation here. So we can even kind of tie this back with nature and nurture, right? If it's nature and nurture, is it the fact that the monster wasn't even conceived of a woman, right? Right? Is so unnaturally created? Is that what makes him monstrous? Because even if we want to bring religion into it, right? Even Jesus Christ was conceived of a woman, right? So yeah, we completely kind of take away that whole aspect. So that's pretty interesting, especially if you combine it with the fact that Shelley is the author herself, lost a kid around this time. So this image of death and all this, this is very much a very famous passage that we're kind of breaking down.
Also, it's strange because his mother actually passed away because she caught, I forgot what it was, but she caught it from Elizabeth when she was nursing her back to health.
Scarlet fever.
Yeah, that was something you definitely didn't want to get back then, right? Yeah, it was a big plague that, especially in Philadelphia. I remember Philadelphia in the early 1800s had a scarlet fever problem. Yeah, they had to quarantine and things like that back in the early 1800s in Philly because of scarlet fever. Yeah, dream interpretation is always kind of tricky, right? Because we can even kind of go back to like people like Freud and all that kind of stuff for discussing dreams. We haven't talked about Freud in this class any, have we? Sigmund Freud's theory of dreams and childhood development. Yeah, we should probably. This will be how we close class out today. I'll explain Sigmund Freud to you guys because it's actually kind of important, the theory of childhood development. But have you guys heard that name before, Sigmund Freud? Maybe you took psychology here or something. Have you talked about him in other classes?
Yeah, I took psychology last year as a junior, and I learned about Sigmund Freud.
I was gonna say I'm taking psychology right now, and we kind of just learned about him a little bit ago.
That's good. Yeah, every time I ask that question, everybody's got different experiences having heard about him. But he is the pioneer of modern psychology. Of course, today, if you talk about psychology, there's psychology and there's psychiatry, right? Freud is psychology. That's the more psychoanalytic school of thought. So Freud invented the study of psychology. So Freud's theory about that this is about a boy child, okay, but he also has this theory about girl children too. But we'll see what you guys think. But Freud's theory of childhood development, when an infant is born, he argues that the infant has an unnatural sort of attraction to the mother, right? So you can call it a sexual attraction if you want to, right? A sort of a natural attraction in a strange way, right? But he argues early on that especially that a boy child has an unnatural attraction to the mother. That's the same thing with girl children and fathers, okay? But what happens is when a father figure comes into the picture for the boy, the father figure kind of shows the boy that, hey, this is taboo. This goes against the rules of society, right? This type of relationship's inappropriate. So a young infant brain kind of, that's the first traumatic moment of a boy's life, Freud argues, right? That moment that the boy realizes that there's a distance between him and the mother, that there's a boundary there, right? So that he argues is the first traumatic moment of a kid's life. And like I said, the same thing goes with girls and their fathers, right? So if you guys have ever heard the phrase, like a woman has daddy issues, right? That's what it means, right? The same Freudian idea. except with women and fathers, just like with boys and mothers. So even though Freud wrote this way after this book was published, right? It's still interesting that you kind of see a little bit of that here. What do you guys, just in general, what do you guys think of that idea? Freud got that from an ancient Greek play called Oedipus the King. It's called the Oedipus complex, right? Because if you ever go back and read the play Oedipus the King, Oedipus accidentally marries his own mother in the play and has kids with her. He does it unknowingly. But what do you guys think of that idea? You think it's crazy? You think there's some little bit of truth to it? What do you guys think?
I don't think it's anything sexual or anything like that, but I think that I guess, for lack of better words, in order for a child to be fully rounded, it does better for them to actually have a male figure and a female figure, because then they get to experience both, and they have the role model that's according to their gender. And I think that is true, but not some type of sexual attraction or something like that.
Right. I think you definitely highlight the importance of both parents. Even like if you see a single parent household, right, without that other parent, sometimes behaviors and things like that can spring up. Jordan, I saw you unmute there. Is you going to say something?
I agree with Jessica. I think it's more of like a role model. Like the boys lean towards more the father wants to become older and they start to develop, as well as the girls look more towards their mother as they grow older and develop. When a girl goes through puberty, she wants a female to instruct her, not necessarily her father.
Right. Any other thoughts on this idea of Oedipus complex with Freud? Those of you who had it in psychology, did I explain it? Did I give it due justice, like your psychology teacher explained it?
Yeah, you pretty much explained it the same way.
Good. Yeah, I raised the question with you guys just because it's an important one, right? Because we have this creature's childhood development, and when does it develop? Like, what stunts the development? Well, for one, the creature doesn't even have a mother. So how does this whole Oedipus complex thing even work without a mother? So it kind of throws the whole thing off balance. But that's a classic passage too, because you guys probably know in the literature, sex and death are always pretty closely related. If you've ever watched a slasher movie, you'll know this, right? A Friday the 13th movie, right? Every time characters have sex in a Friday the 13th movie, Jason comes and kills them, right? You know, so sex and death are always very much sort of linked in literature. So with that whole passage, that's why that Victor's he kisses her and she becomes his mother, and then she rots into a corpse, right? You know, this whole thing. This is a trope as old as time, right? Sex and death are always sort of linked. You guys know this if you watch horror movies. You guys know this. Yeah, the reason why is it's said that when a man ejaculates or whatever, right, that's almost like a death. right? So that's the reason why it has that association. So fun fact of the day to close out class, right? Right. I can't end with a crazier thought than this, right? So we will end right there. So let me quickly write down everybody who's here so I can give you your credit for being here. Okay, so let me make sure I got everybody. Jordan, Paige. Paige, you were unusually quiet today. Everything okay over there?
Yeah, I'm really bad for not sleeping at night.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm just tired.
I get it. I get it.
Sorry.
You're good. I'll just pick on you extra next week. How's that sound?
Okay, I'll be better next week. I promise.
Hey, Jordan, Haley. Hey, let's see. I wrote this earlier. Let me make sure I'm accurate here. Jordan, Paige, Haley.
I was there most of the time, but my iPad like died 2 or 3 times, and then at one point Zoom just like kicked me off. So next week I will be sure to charge my iPad more.
Gotcha. Yeah, I noticed you flickering in and out there. Abe, Megan, Audrey, Kinsey. All right, I got everybody down. So you guys have a good weekend. Real quick, early next week, I'll have you do an early week response on part 2 of the book. And then part 3 of the book, through the end, we'll come and discuss as a class. Okay, so that'll be how the flow goes next week. So kind of like a middle sort of 2/3 of the way through, I'll ask you some questions and then you proceed on from there and we'll talk about it as a whole class. Okay.
Do you want us to do the early week response on the 1831 or the original?
You guys are doing the 1830s, right? So you might as well stick with it. So yeah, yeah, I'll do a little bit of research on that, see what all other differences there are for next week. I'll do some research for you guys, find out more.
Mr. Yeager, I hope this isn't a stupid question, but you said read chapters 1 or like the chapters 1 through 7. So that meant we read chapter 7 too, right?
Yes.
Okay, I did. I was just being sure because I was a little confused.
Yeah, the reading ended today when Victor and when the monster's getting ready to tell Victor his story. That's where the reading ended for today.
For mine, it ended right when William died, and Victor was like, "Yeah, I know who killed him. I saw him in the forest," but didn't really explain.
Yeah, so your chapters are even chaptered different.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, there's actually 8 chapters in the first part of the 1831.
Okay, so
How much do we read this week?
it was chapter 1 through 7 for me. That was my book lists it as volumes. It says volume 1, volume 2.
Oh, mine says chapters.
Yeah. Each volume has chapters in it, so that's how mine's arranged.
I'm trying to read mine on like the iBooks app on iPhone, and like all the pages are all completely just like, it seems like they're out of like, I guess, page number. Because what would be for chapter 4 and you was in like chapter 1 for my book, so it was all, I was confused trying to find it.
Yeah, so when I give you your directions for next week, I'll specify what happens in the plot at each point you stop. Okay. And
Yeah.
instead of listing it by chapters, since it's so wildly different.
Yeah.
I've taught this book 3 or 4 times. This is the first time I've ever noticed these problems. So I'm glad you guys brought them up.
I had another small question. He like randomly starts saying a little poem every now and then, and I don't know if I just misread it, but like I was just kind of confused about that. It'll be like a small rhyme, like the font will be a few sizes smaller, it looks like. The first time it happens while he's walking, and I just noticed it when I was going ahead a bit that it happens again.
Yeah, I know right before he goes up into the mountains, he says a little poem then. There's a little poem in there then about the mountains. So, yeah, she's actually quoting her husband Percy's poem about Mont Blanc in Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Her husband Percy wrote one of the most famous poems ever called Mont Blanc, which is where Victor meets the monster at the end of our reading for today.
I found it. It says that he was walking, it's like where he was walking down the road. It was right after he had like walked away from his tower thing. Then it was like one on a loathsome road who doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. So I'm guessing she just included that because her husband wrote it.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just kind of wondering. I was like, that came out of nowhere. It was pleasant, but it came out of nowhere.
If you guys are curious before next week, look up that poem. It's a really good one. Mont Blanc by Percy Shelley. Yeah, it's worth a Google because it's a really good poem. All right, guys. Well, I will see you again next week.
Bye-bye.